Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about the rise of feudal society. We're going to start by being able to explain the structure of feudal society and its economic, social, and political effects. Alright, so just quickly to reframe these, we've talked so far about the rise of Catholic power in Western Europe. We've talked about the rise of the Frankish kingdom leading eventually to the creation of the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. And the next thing that we talked about is we talked about outside invaders, the Magyars, the Vikings, groups such as that starts to attack Western Europe and raid Western Europe. Alright, and these groups, the death of Charlemagne is going to lead to a weakening of the Holy Roman Empire. The people who follow him, the rulers who follow him, are not as strong as he is. They don't do a very good job of holding the empire together. And this weakness is going to leave the empire susceptible to invasions by the Vikings, the Magyar. The Muslims will come calling a couple of times too. Alright, and the inability of the empire to protect their people from these invaders is going to lead people to turn to their local leaders for protection because the kings are too weak to defend their regions. So we had the Holy Roman Empire, then we have the Vikings and the Magyar invasions that we've talked about. And these invasions are significant because they're going to lead to the locals turning to leaders for protection. The kings are too weak, and this is how we have feudal society developing. Alright, and the basic structure of feudal society is we're going to have the king on top. We do have the king, not maybe the most powerful of kings, but the king's going to give land. Let me move this so you can see the word king. The king will trade land to powerful local lords in return for loyalty and military service. So instead of being the ruler of all of his land, he might retain that title, but he's going to give someone land and titles. So they might become the Baron of Bristow or the Count of Manassas, whatever title depending upon where you were. And that local lord or vassal would be responsible for that area in exchange for providing military service to the king in times of need. Now, the vassal would not actually do the military service, so the vassal would take his land and divide it up even more amongst knights in return for their military service. Alright? And then the knights would serve the vassals directly, so whenever the vassal needed protection or needed to send troops to the king, he would send the knights. And the knights also had knights in training, which were known as squires. And now you're wondering who in this whole process is working the fields, and that's where we have serfs. Okay, and this is where we get the term servant from eventually. Alright, serfs are going to work the land in exchange for housing and protection. So they don't necessarily get wages, but their whole thing is they're getting a roof over their head, they're getting food on their table, and they're not getting run down by Magyar horses. So the serfs are doing all of this for protection. So, little illustration here of how it works. The king would grant land down to barons or vassals or whatever. It would be a duke depending upon where you were. Just depended which particular country you were in as to what that title was. The barons would then grant the land to the knights. The knights would quote-unquote grant the land to the peasants. But it wasn't the peasants' land, it was just a plot of land they were responsible for working. So the peasants would provide food and services for the knights, who would then provide protection and service to the barons, and so on and so forth up the system. And this is the system that we settle into in the aftermath of these invasions, leading to what is essentially the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is going to exist for a while, it's just not strong. Alright, and the second thing that goes along with this is we have an economy that ceases to be global. We stop having trade. Okay, we had talked about during the Roman Empire how we had trade throughout the Mediterranean region and throughout Europe. Well, that stops to happen. Global economy is going to go away. It's going to start to revolve around the lord's estate, or what becomes known as a manor. Now, our manors are self-sufficient. Okay, if you guys can think about the geography of Western Europe, southern Britain, Germany, France, those areas are very similar to the central United States. They're heavily wooded, um, relatively flat, not super duper mountainous. I mean, hills here and there, but nothing too crazy. And then on top of that, it's going to be a warmer climate where you can farm. So our manors are going to have access to lumber. They're going to usually be built around some kind of stream where they get water, so they'll be able to plant and grow food. Agriculture and livestock. Manors become self-sufficient. So few people are ever going to leave the manor. Most serfs would be born on a manor, and then they would probably very rarely ever leave about like a 3-mile radius. And this right here is an overhead shot of what a manor generically looked like. All right, we'd have the manor house, the lord's house. The blacksmith would be down near the water. We'd have a mill which used the power of the water to grind any wheat that was grown into flour. We'd have the village, which would be where the serfs lived. The church's priest house. Trees where we could chop down for lumber if we needed it. Orchard of some kind of fruit. And then you guys see how these are. And you see how we have the field split up, and they had a system that they would have a fallow field. So we had spring planting, fall planting, and a fallow field. They'd have winter wheat and they'd have fall wheat, so that they that way wouldn't have to, run out of food over the winter. They'd be able to have a couple of harvests, and then they'd have a fallow field where they would leave the field ungrown for a year to help the field recover, because believe it or not, growing plants will actually suck the life out of a field a little bit. Here's another picture, a little more three-dimensional and entertaining. You guys can pause and read this if you want. I'm going to move on. Alright, and then the growth of trade. Finally, as we start to get towards the end of this period, local lords are going to continue to grow in power. And they're exchanging taxes. They're sending money to the kings, so they've got to find another way to raise this money. So what you're going to have them do is they're going to form what become our first towns, townships, cities, under the authority of feudal lords. So if we have our Baron of Bristow, he's going to make this the town of Bristow. And the reason he's doing that is then that way he can charge taxes on trade. So while trade is still limited at this time, he can now charge a tariff. If you import something or if a trade deal goes on, I'm going to charge you a tax. I might charge an export tax to my blacksmith. So if my blacksmith wants to put shoes on a horse of a traveler, I'm going to charge a tax on it. It's a way for these lords to line their pockets. Now, as we have the creation of taxing and governments like that, we're also going to have the creation of our first guilds. And guilds are organizations of individuals that are in the same business, and they are working to help each other out. So you might have all the blacksmiths in a couple of towns band together to agreement. So they're settling on common prices, common standards of service, so that no one gets a leg up on the other, so that they all have a chance to succeed. And that so they can also resist being overtaxed. Guilds are going to become a political force in towns. And the reason we need to be aware of what a guild is guilds have a precursor to something you see in this day and age, which is known as a union. Alright? A guild is an organization of individuals who work the same job, who band together for their common benefit. That's exactly what a labor union is. So those can trace their roots back to medieval Western Europe. Alright? And then here are some SOL questions for you to play with.